welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to handle reading data out of something called a data block here using BASIC. And so the assignment that you're asked to do is to create a data block and to read the information out of it and to print it to the screen. And so whereas it seems like this is a relatively short assignment, there is quite a bit going on. And so let me take you through what the elements are in this. We are going to create something called a data block. And I'm going to ask you for all of the data blocks that you do in this class to use a specific naming convention in what you call that data block, although you could call it anything that you want. When we use data blocks in BASIC, we call the data block read data. So read data is the name of our data block, and inside of the data block, we're using the keyword read, and also we are using the keyword data. And so it makes it very easy for us to remember the name of our read data block is read data, and inside of our read data block, we have to have both a read statement and then for each piece of information, a data statement as well. And so we're going to create a read data block in this that's going to use these numbers right here. And if you don't recognize these numbers, 1 times 2 is 2, times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, times 2 is 32. So this is a doubling effect of numbers on here, and I've got several of them. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a while loop that'll access of the pieces of data, this data in here. We're going to read it in until we get to 0, and then we're not going to print the 0 on here. The 0 is what we're going to call, we're going to consider to be an end of file, or a placeholder at the end of our data block that indicates that our data is done. So let's jump over into the BASIC editor. Here we are. And again, like always, I ask you to give me your name, give me the class that you're in, give me what script you're working on, and I will post this starter code for you in the assignment. If you would please finish this assignment by tweaking the code to make it yours. That's what I'm looking for. So again, here we go. I've got main, and of course, as you know, main, if you have a main function on here or you need an end. And then what I've already told you is this. I am going to use a data block in here that's called read data. And it looks just like a function to us because actually we are going to use it as a function. This block of data called read data is going to be a function for us that we call again and again and again from inside of a loop. Now, for what I suggested to you before was that for the read data block, I'm going to have two keywords in here. I'm going to have the word keyword read, and I'm going to have the keyword data. So I'm going to need both of these keywords to be in here, but they have a very specific function for us inside of this. Data, where I have the word data, I am going to read number 1 on a single line in here. So where I have data 1, I'm reading data, and my data at this point is the number 1. Then I'm going to have data be 2, and then I'm going to have data be 4, and then I'm going to have data be 8, etc., all the way up to 256 on this. And so, I'll have 16, data 32, data 64, data 128, and data 256. And then this very last piece of data here is 0. And so all I've done is I've taken these pieces of data. I want one on each line, each of them on a separate line, and wherever that piece of data is, it has to be preset with the word data and then the data that's on here. The word data and then the data that's on here. The word data and then the data that's on here. So this is how we're formatting this special function called read data. Now if you notice, I do have this read up here, but I don't have anything in there. If I were to ask you to declare a numeric variable named x and set it equal to the value 0, you would do that something like this. You would say, oh, I need to declare a variable, and so we could use let x equals 0. This would be a completely appropriate way to declare a variable named x. In our cases, we don't need to use that much syntax. We simply say x is 0. So what we're saying here is this, is that a variable name which can be assigned some information on this. Now, I don't want to declare that up here. I don't want it there. What I want is I want that variable right here. This is where I want my variable. My variable is going to be named x, and anytime I want to call read data, I'm going to say read into the variable x the number 1, for example, the first time. And then the next time I call read data, I'm going to say read into the variable x. I've already read 1, now I'm going to read 2. The next time I call read data, I'm going to say read into the variable x. I've already called 1, I've already called 2, now it's going to read 4. The next time I call read data, I'm going to say read into variable x. I've already called 1, I've already called 2, I've already called 4, now 8. So what happens is that BASIC has a counter that it remembers which piece of data it's already read, and if you call read data again, it will read the next piece of information in, and then the next piece of information in, etc. So this is the convention that we use for what we call a read data block. We will get into reading multiple pieces of data in one after another and another, and we will get into reading many pieces of data along the same line, but those are exercises that are coming up. For now, all I want you to do is to be able to read in one piece of data at a time, and this is the way that we do it. So up here in my main function, if you remember back over here on the assignment, this takes care of this. We've created a data block with the following pieces of data, each on one line. That's it. We're done with this 2-point side. Now what we want to do is we want to create a while loop that will access or call that data block, printing each piece of data to the screen with each pass. So we've done while loops before. If you remember, I'm going to do a do, and I'm going to say loop until, and in here I'm going to say loop until what? And I'm going to say until x is not equal to 0. So what happens is that eventually I'm going to reach this piece of information right here that says 0. And once it says 0, I don't want to read anything else in at that point. So really all I want to do is I want to read in until this is done. And so right here, just like I indicated before, this is a function. And this loop is going to call this function repeatedly until I get to 0. So here, all I have to do is say, go sub, read data, and at this point, I'm calling a read for the data. I'm calling a read for the data. I'm calling a read for the data. And so this is the nature of how this will go. Now keep in mind, I'm asking you also to print, and in this case, I'm asking you to print whatever x is. So here we go. Do this. So this is a 1.5 loop, which means there's no conditional up here at the top. So it's going to immediately call read data. It goes into the read data block. The read variable is set to x. It'll grab data 1. It'll come back up here now. It's holding x equals 1. It's going to print 1. It's going to check. Is x not equal to 0? True, x is not equal to 0, so it's going to go back up to the do. I'm going to run this. What we should see is we should see all of the data print out one line after another, and we should get the black screen with the 1 through whatever on there, and all I got was 1 right here. So it did read that first piece of data out. Let's go back out here and debug this and figure out why it did not do this, and I'm guessing it's because of this right here. So it's going to loop until x is not equal to 0, and when 1 is here, that is not equal to 0. So what I want instead of a not equals to is an equals to. And if I run this again, I should now be able to see all of the data print out. And my error on this is going to be that it also prints 0 at the end. So I have that 0 right there at the end, which is in my loop. You can see that it's a part of my data, And for this, I know that I don't specify this in the assignment, but you should be thinking that this last piece of data is not part of this doubling data. It clearly is different than that. So what we need to do is we need to adjust our loop here so that it won't print that 0 out. I'm going to close this here. And if you remember on our work on loops, we said that there was some way to basically make this. There's a couple things that we can do with this loop. We can do what's called a priming read, where we read data in and then we go and we process this. We could check before we print on here, is x equals 0? Then don't print it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest to you that the best way to do this is I'm going to do a read data right here, okay? I'm going to do a read data right there, right before I get into my loop, okay? And so what I've got is that what I want to do is I want to then go ahead and print whatever I get in here, and I'm going to move my go sub read data down a little bit, okay? All I've done is reorder what I'm doing here. I have this should be a go sub read data, and what's going to happen is this. When I finally do read 0 into this loop, it's going to say loop until x equals 0, and then it's going to bail on me. It's going to exit out of here. But I am going to know I've got a 0, and then I'm going to find that 0, and I'm going to exit. I'll show you that this will do what we want it to do. It's going to print 1 through 256. It will not print 0 at this point, which is what I want it to do. This is the preferred readout that I want you to have, is 1 through 256. The reason is this, is that, again, if you recall the three big things that we have in code, we have sequence, which is top to bottom, or the way our code is ordered. We have loops, and then we have sequence selection and sequence selection and if statements. So sequence, selection, and it's escaping me. But what we're doing here is that we're changing the sequence on this. So instead of reading the data the first time inside of this, sequence, selection, and loop are our three tools. I'm using a loop, which is my do loop. I've changed my sequence, and my selection here, I'm making a selection before I get into this. So I'm doing a priming read to grab the variable x1 right here. I grab 1 and I print it. Then right here, I've grabbed 2. By the time I get down here and I grab 0, I'm already inside of my loop here. And once I grab 0, I check if it's 0 and I exit. So this is the nature of what I'm asking you to do. I've enclosed this in a go sub read data function. I'd like you to do the same on this. This should take you through what you need to do for the for script 16. I'll post part of this code. I'd like you to go ahead and finish the code for me and submit the assignment. Please let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.